Thank you. My name is Greg Jan, and I and Laura Wells will be coordinating this presentation. Laura, many of you know, but she's been a Green Party member since 1992 when we first qualified for the ballot, and she's run for several offices, including state controller and governor and US Congress. And Laura's been very active with internal organizing, especially at the state level, and has been a member of our state coordinating committee for a number of years. And I've been involved with the Greens since the mid 1980s, before we were actually a party, and was part of the drive to put us on the ballot, and have been involved ever since with both candidate campaigns as well as internal organizing, especially at the county level. So I'm going to do most of the presentation on the history part, and Laura will do most of the presentation on the future of the Green Party. And we'll take questions after each section. So I'm planning to talk about the history in 3 sections. The first section will be from the early 1980s until when we qualified in 1992. The second section will be from 1992 until 2003, 2003 being the peak of our registration numbers in California. And, you know, some would feel that that was the apex of our activity, depending how you want to count it. And then the last part will be from 2004 until the present. So if there's no any logistical questions or anything, I think we can get started. All right, so where did the Green Party come from? Well, as far as the US Green Party, and those of us in California, many of us first heard about the Greens when the German Greens got just over 5% in their national election back in 1983, and therefore were qualified under proportional representation to have seats in the national legislature, the Bundestag. And they were seated with 27 members in 1983. Of course, they'd been developing for a number of years before that, and they had founded their party on 4 pillars: grassroots democracy, ecology, nonviolence, and social justice. And of course, later on, we in the United States decided to have 10 key values instead of 4 pillars. So after people in the US heard what was going on with the Greens in Germany and other places in Europe were starting, Charlene Spretnak and Fritjof Capra, the next year, 1984, they published this book, Green Politics, and was published in the early part of 1984, and there was a lot of interest, and so they called a meeting in the, I think it was August of 1984 in St. Paul, Minnesota. And they had invited some 200 activist organizations around the country, as well as other activists that they knew. And I think there was less than 100 people in all that attended. And that's where they decided to kick off the Green movement. You know, we're talking here the mid 1980s. So the book does speculate about whether there should be a political party, but they weren't ready to kick it off immediately into a political party. So the idea is that people would go back to their local areas and start organizing green groups to talk about green issues, as well as when and if we might start a political party. And so that was 1984. And I actually went to, I think I went to one meeting at the very end of 1984. And I know that by early 1985, I was regularly attending meetings. These were in San Francisco, and Danny Moses was kind of chairing those meetings. And several of us from the East Bay decided, well, this is cool. We're going over to San Francisco, you know, every other week or something, and talking about organizing, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, there's plenty of us here in the East Bay, so why don't we get something going in the East Bay? So we had a few more meetings in the East Bay, and we had a founding meeting of the, we called it the East Bay Green Alliance in May of 1985. And it was at the BFUU, the Unitarian Universalists up there on Cedar and Bonita in Berkeley. And both Charlene and Danny and several, oh, we actually had Jonathan Porritt. He was one of the big leaders of the Greens in the UK. And he happened to be in town, so we had him there too. And so we kicked off local Green movement organizing in the middle of 1985. And, you know, we had regular meetings and talked about what to do. And sometime either 85 or 86, we started a newsletter and keeping people that weren't able to go to all the meetings in touch. And I think we ended up with over a dozen, maybe even 15 different working groups, and people were working on all kinds of different activist things. And that kept going locally for a number of years. And the same thing was happening, as you can imagine, all around the country. In fact, I think that within about 4 years after 1985, so around by 1989 or so, there were over 300, maybe closer to 350 local groups all over the country, including several dozen in California. And every so often we would have California meetings. So we would have representatives of, you know, 15, 20 green groups around California would meet in the late 1980s and talk about what we were doing and this and that. And so let's see. Oh, yeah. And so there were a couple of large conferences that happened. I mean, there were a lot of small gatherings, both around the country as well as regionally and locally. But there were two large gatherings. One was in 1987 in Amherst, Massachusetts. This was the first national green gathering at Hampshire College. And there was something like 1,000 people there. Unfortunately, I don't have very good recollection. I think I was very busy and very impressed with everything happening, but it was very exciting because we're all keeping track of how the Greens were growing in Europe and elsewhere, and we were starting to feel that, you know, we too could get organized, and so it was very exciting. And I won't get into some of the aftermath of that conference. And then what's it, the next year? Let's see. Yeah, next year, 1988. So then we had the big gathering out here. It was at a Boy Scout camp in the San Mateo woods up there in the country near La Honda. And again, you know, we had like 1,000 people show up, and there were all kinds of presentations by all kinds of people that were identified with the Greens back then. It was very, very exciting. By the way, there's a lot more information on this on both the National Party website and the State Party website. So if you want more details, you can just do a search on your favorite search engine for Green Party history, and you'll be sure to find those two pages. And so, okay, so we had all these meetings and organizing, but eventually a number of us thought, well, you know, there's activist organizations that actually specialize in every single issue that we're all working on. So, you know, if you were working to help the Native Americans in Big Mountain, or if you were worried about pesticides, or if you were concerned about social justice, or about whatever war, I think we were in the Central American wars then. There are, of course, nonprofit groups that specialize in all these things. And so eventually people said, well, you know, what's our role in the bigger movement? Well, since there's an activist group focusing on every issue, maybe we should think about becoming a political party. So in 1989, there was another green gathering, national green gathering in Eugene, Oregon. And that was one of the topics, you know, people were talking about, is now the time to start a national green party, or at least state green parties. And a number of the California delegates, including myself, went off during one of the time breaks and said, yeah, let's just talk about California. And so there were enough people there that felt that that was our role in the larger green movement, that we decided there in 1989 that we would try to figure out how exactly to start a Green Party in California. And by early 1990, we had done enough of the legwork and checked in with enough of the other counties in California that we kind of kicked it off. And according to the rules, to qualify a political party, you had to get enough people to register with your party such that it was at least 2% of the people that voted in the last gubernatorial election. So it was something like 90,000 people. We had to get 90,000 people to register with the Green Party. And we kicked it off in 1990. And by a year later, we'd only gotten like 10,000 out of the 90,000 we needed. And I think that was when we got Joe Louis Hoffman on board. Some of you may have attended the service that we had for Joe. Unfortunately, he passed away. Was it a year and a half ago? Something like that. Anyway, and with Joe's great organizing skills combined with his humor, but nevertheless ability to make sure that we did the things we needed to do, we were able to get the signature drive going. And even though we were still short by about 30 or 40,000 registrations with just about 2 months left, somehow everybody came through, and by the end we were over 100,000. So we managed to get enough registrations, and in mid-January of 1992, the Secretary of State gave us our official notice that we were the latest political party to officially qualify. And of course, during all this time, other activity was going around the rest of the country. The national organization was originally called Committees of Correspondence, after the group that communicated before the Revolutionary War, corresponded. And later it was changed to Green Committees of Correspondence, and then finally to Green Party USA. And the same year that we qualified, 1992, I think a bit later in the year, three state parties also qualified. Arizona, New Mexico, and Hawaii, and Alaska had actually qualified in 1990. So these were all in the Western states, but you know, elsewhere, other Greens were talking about starting parties as well. So what's happening? What else I got here? Oh, and of course, there was also a lot of platform discussions back then. So shortly after that 1987 national gathering in Massachusetts, a group was formed to talk about what should the Green platform be. They called it SPACA, Strategy and Policy Approaches in Key Areas. And I guess they didn't want to be presumptuous and think they were going to create a platform, so they came up with another title for what they were doing. And again, by 1989, that other gathering in Eugene, Oregon, they'd figured out enough that they were going to, you know, ratify the next year. They had a ratifying conference in 1990, whereas in 1989 they kind of like got the final input. So that was where the forerunner of our National Green Party platform came from in those early days. And I think that's probably enough on the early portion. So, okay, so we're up to 1992 when we qualified for the ballot. And in November of 1992, here in Alameda County, Dona Spring got elected to the Berkeley City Council as a Green, and she was to continue on for over 15 years. And by the time that she left office, she was the Green who had held office for the longest time, over 15 years. And of course, we also, let me pull this out. And so we also published the Green Voter Guides. This was the very first Green Voter Guide in June of 1992. It had this thinking ahead for the thinking voter. And then in November, we switched to the sunflower. And then later on, we had different versions of the sunflower. Here's one later on we used for a few years. And here's another one we used for several more years. And then finally, in 2012, finally in 2012, we switched to the current front cover that we have. So we've published our voter guides continuously every statewide election, every major election since 1992. And I guess for the record books, Harry Hoke was the one back in 1992 that suggested doing a voter guide, and everybody loved the idea, and we've been doing it ever since. Okay, so let's see. 1992 was, of course, also a presidential year when that traitor to even liberal causes, Bill Clinton, got elected. And the Green Party of California decided that we would stay out of the presidential race, and we weren't ready for anything like that. And so, you know, we didn't run any, I don't know if there was a US senator, but we didn't run for president. And if there was a US senator race, we didn't run for US Senate. And so we didn't run for any statewide offices, but we did run for a bunch of local offices. And let's see, this 1992 was the first year that a lot of Greens ran for office all over the country. There were 20 Greens that got elected in the United States out of 93 candidates. And here in California, 11 of us got elected out of 44 candidates that we ran. Probably the top office that we won was the equivalent of a county supervisor. It's called county council in Hawaii. And Keiko Bonk was our top office holder in 1992. And then in 1994, with the gubernatorial election, we decided that yes, we would contest some statewide offices. Danny Moses, who you recall was part of the founding of the Green Party, he ran for lieutenant governor, and Margaret Garcia ran for Secretary of State, and Barbara Long for US Senate. And Margaret got 3.8% of the vote, over the 2% threshold. So we were able to maintain our ballot status, because even though we had just over 100,000 registrations back in 1992, a lot of the people said, yeah, I'll sign, I'll change my registration to put you on the ballot, but I'm going to go back to, you know, of course, it was mostly Democrats. I'm going to go back to Democrat because I'm used to voting in the Democratic primary, but yeah, it's good to have competition. So by 1994, we were down to below 80,000, 79,000 registrations. And so if Margaret had not passed that 2% threshold, we would have lost our ballot status, and we would have had to do another signature drive and get us over whatever the threshold was at that point. But fortunately, we did okay, and we continue on our ballot status. I don't have any notes about any local races besides Dona Spring continuing, but we did later on run for a bunch of local seats. But we didn't win any of them until later on. I'll mention that in a minute. All right, the next election year, by the way, you know, most of this is going to track our electoral history, because at that point, being a political party, we were very focused on elections, including, of course, the voter guide, which gave recommendations, but also building the Green Party through elections, partisan offices. So the next time, 1996, there had been some national conferences, and one of Ralph Nader's employees, somebody who worked in his office, was at one of the national conferences and was pretty impressed. And he thought there was a chance that Ralph Nader could be convinced to run for president, this upstart party. And so late 1995, we contacted Ralph at the recommendation of his employee, and sure enough, Ralph said, yes, I'm willing to have my name be on the California ballot and some other ballots, but I need to tell you that I am not ready to do any kind of full-scale campaign. So Nader just basically said, yeah, go ahead, put my name on the ballot, and I'm going to spend less than $5,000 on my entire campaign, so I don't have to file any of those damn forms. He probably didn't use the word damn, but okay. So 1996, Nader was on the ballot, and by the time it was all over, he was actually on the ballot in 22 states, and around the country got 0.7% of the vote. And apparently he thought that was pretty good, because by 4 years later, he did do a all-out campaign. But let me first go over some of my notes here. What else happened in 1996? Well, again, a lot of Greens ran for local office, and there were, let's see, oh, okay. And so the biggest highlight in 1996 was up in Arcata, Humboldt County. We won 3 out of the existing 5 seats there, and we took over the Arcata City Council. It was the first time, certainly in the United States, and maybe in many other places around the world, where any Green Party had taken over the majority of the city council. Unfortunately, it didn't last too long, but it was great news while it happened. And I should tell you that, we were getting a significant amount of media coverage through this whole process, but it was nothing like, of course, what happened in 2000 when Nader ran for president. But we were getting growing amounts of coverage. And of course, for a local office, you expect it locally. And for statewide, even the previous year, 1994, when Danny Moses ran for lieutenant governor, the SF Examiner, some of you who've been around the Bay Area a while remember that the SF Examiner used to be a fairly significant newspaper, a regular daily newspaper, and they actually endorsed Danny Moses for lieutenant governor. So we got some good attention out of that. Okay, so we'll move on. 1998, we ran our first governor candidate, Dan Hamburg, and Sarah Meir for lieutenant governor. Sarah got just over 3%, so that helped keep us on the ballot. Although by then, our registrations were up to 98,000. So I guess we probably stayed on the ballot that way as well. And then in 1999, one of these fluke kind of things happened, which you just can't predict, but sometimes things come up, which will. There was a special election for state assembly because I believe the existing office holder had decided to move on to another office, so they needed to have a special election to fill the seat. And the Republicans, back then the special elections is you have everybody on the ballot at once, and then the top candidate from each party will go forward to the runoff election if nobody gets 50% or more in the initial election. And so there were several Democrats in the race, including former state legislature and Oakland Mayor Elihu Harris. And Republicans had planned to field a candidate, but they made some filing mistakes or something. And so they didn't actually get anybody on the ballot. But we put Audie Bach on the ballot in the special election. And Elihu Harris got the top amount of votes. So he went forward to the runoff because he didn't get over 50%. And of course, Audie Bach, being the one and only Green, she went forward to the runoff as well. And there was no Republican in the race. And then Elihu Harris's campaign made a big mistake because there was an independent expenditure, although we're sure that some of the people working with Elihu Harris wouldn't have allowed it. I mean, knew about it because you can't imagine that it would have happened unless there was some knowledge this was going to happen, which is that the Democratic Party sent coupons for free chicken dinners to a bunch of voters, mostly in Black areas in Oakland. And it was so demeaning, and the media made such a story of it that Elihu Harris's campaign just shut up, and you hardly heard a peep from them. And in the meanwhile, we got a huge amount of attention because all these Republicans that didn't want the Democrats to win the office, started approaching us and saying, yeah, we think you got a big prospect here, and they helped us, as well as other Democrats that were upset with what Elihu Harris had done. And we did this crazy grassroots campaign, and the one and only time that a Green has ever gotten in the California state legislature. We got elected in 1999, not by a huge margin, but you only need 50% plus one. But unfortunately, when Audie got up to Sacramento, she was too taken in by all the glamour and, I guess you could say, power, and the Democrats wined her and dined her. And eventually she said, well, if I'm going to stay in office, I got to do it the way that everybody else does it. I got to start taking big money donations. And she even decided to take donations from oil companies, and that was the last straw. So, we broke with her, and she broke with us, and she was not reelected. But anyway, it was a big fluke, and it just showed you how the Green name was on the rise. And then so that was 1999. And the next year, probably most of you know, Ralph Nader did a strong campaign for president. He got just under 3%, 2.7% of the national vote. Was on 44 ballots, and that was the highest percentage that a progressive third party had gotten in 75 years since, I forgot his name now, but the Progressive Party, La Follette, Bob La Follette. So anyway, so it was a good campaign, except for one thing, of course, was at the very end, you remember that in 2000, there was the state of Florida, and I forget whether it was 435 votes or whatever it was, but it was so close that the Supreme Court took it over, and the Democrats cleverly put out the message that, oh, well, Nader got all these many thousands of votes in Florida, and surely that enough of them would have voted for Gore. So it was Nader's fault. In other words, Nader's fault. And so we got a lot of bad publicity just because the Democrats were able to put out that meme. And in some ways, it's been part of what we've been up against ever since, because every so often you'll find somebody that still mentions it, even though it's 20 years old now. All right, so 2000, 2000 was also the year that we did really well locally. Or is that later? No, it's later. Okay, we did get John Solosky elected to the Berkeley School Board, and that was also the year that current Oakland City Council member Rebecca Kaplan, she was registered Green back then, and she ran for the at-large seat as a Green, and of course didn't get elected then, but she was later to be appointed to the AC Transit Board, and then won election as a Green for AC Transit. And then of course she decided to switch to Democrats. Okay, and then finally in this section, 2003. 2003 was the peak of 2002, 2003 was around the peak of our registrations, especially because of the Nader campaign. During and shortly after the Nader campaign, large numbers of people registered Green. So we went up from around 100,000 to over 150,000 registrations just in like a 2-year period. And so in 2002, Peter Cameo ran for governor, got just over 5%. And the top vote getter then was statewide for the Greens was Laura Wells, getting just under 6% in 2002. Okay, so I guess I need to speed it up because I'm running a little late. Okay, so the last section, 2004 until the present. 2004, we ran David Cobb, and of course, a lot of people were very afraid that we were again going to become spoilers, so that was a very low-key campaign. 2006, we ran for governor again, Peter Cameo again. This time we got much lower vote totals, 2.3% for Peter Cameo, and Laura and Larry Caffiero for insurance commissioner tied for top statewide office polling, 3.2%. But 2006 was the year that we did the best locally here in Alameda County. We had 3 Greens elected to the Berkeley Rent Board: Lisa Stevens, Pam Webster, and Chris Kavanaugh. And that was also when Rebecca Kaplan won election to the AC Transit. And that was also when Amy Allison ran for Oakland City Council District 2 and did really well. And Amy was to run 2 more times for Oakland City Council, and each time, getting over 40%. I think one was like 46%, but not quite being able to win election. And then ever since then, those of you that have followed, she's become a player in the Democratic Party. Okay, 2008. So here is probably the first big drop in our registrations. 2008, you recall, was when Barack Obama threw his hat in the ring for president. And all these Greens thought, oh gosh, we're gonna have the first elected Black president. I better change my registration so I can vote for Obama instead of Hillary Clinton. So we lost a huge number of Greens in 2008 to the Democrats, and most of them never came back, even though we tried to do outreach. And of course, our candidate, Cynthia McKinney, who was a Black former elected congresswoman from Georgia, unfortunately, because of Obama, she was not able to get much headway. So that was our story with 2008. And by 2010, we dropped down to 114,000 registrations. And let's see, 2010, Laura Wells ran for governor. And that was also when Bill Balderston, one of our other local Greens, ran for insurance commissioner. And then wrapping up the rest of it, most of you know this, 2012, Jill Stein. 2014, Luis Rodriguez ran for governor, and that was when we had the highest vote totals for any statewide office. Ellen Brown, running for treasurer, got 6.6%, and Laura was not too far behind, running for controller at 5.7%. And then 2016, Jill Stein ran again. This is another big drop in our registrations because Bernie Sanders ran. And so people wanted to vote for Bernie instead of Hillary Clinton. And so they registered out of the Green Party. And again, we lost a bunch of people in 2016. And then in 2018, we had a very low campaign. Josh Jones was the governor candidate. 2020, of course, Howie Hawkins ran for president. And by last year, I forget the month, but by last year we were down to 88,000 registrations because of especially those 2 lower numbers from Obama and from Bernie Sanders. So I think that takes us up pretty much to the present. I don't know if anyone has any. I'm now looking at some of the items in the chat. Yes, there was not time to mention all the many candidates, both in California as elsewhere. But if you check out those websites, either the National Party or the State Party websites, you'll find all kinds of information about other candidates we won. All right, so Justin, if you want to take over checking on questions, if anyone has questions on or even comments on this history section.
Yeah, if anyone has a comment or question, please use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen. I see Karin and Sonoma County. Go ahead.
Hey, Greg, thanks for the presentation. It's great to see everyone here. I just want to know, as someone who knows this history and has been in it the whole time, like, what are 1 or 2 big takeaways you have from our history? Over.
In the earlier phases, how the Democrats either left us alone or went after us did make a big difference. Some of you may know that Matt Gonzalez ran as a Green for mayor of San Francisco, and the Democrats really targeted Matt. They would not allow a major office like mayor of San Francisco, so they brought in Jesse Jackson, they brought in Bill Clinton. It was huge, and Matt still did well. I think he was over 40%. I don't know if he was 45%, but nevertheless, when the Democrats target us, it has made a difference. Now, we haven't mounted any huge campaigns in the last 5 or 10 years, so I don't think the Democrats have targeted us too much. And the other thing is, there's always stuff you can't predict, like that Audi Block thing. I mean, run for office, and who knows? Circumstances may mean you could get elected. Right.
You're muted, Justin.
Michael Rubin, I see your hand. Go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. Obviously I wanted to mention Matt Gonzalez because I think that was an important event in the history of our party, but that's been taken care of. What I really want to talk about is the non-electoral, something non-electoral. That is, for me personally, when the Green Party first came about, there was a hesitance to be considered a leftist party. The slogan of the day at the beginning was, "We're not left, we're not right, we're ahead," which I think was a lot of baloney. And I think that, thinking about the history, I mean, it's still not 100%, but the fact is that now, I would say a majority, at least, of the active Greens consider our party to be a leftist party, and I think that that's a tremendous improvement. Over.
Yeah, I have no comments. You're absolutely right, and especially in the very early days, some of us thought that some active Greens in the very early days thought that electoral politics was too corrupt, and the Greens were beyond that, and we were kind of, bioregional, deep ecology types, and so that was a conflict, certainly in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when people were deciding if we should become a political party, and then for at least a little while afterwards.
All right, next hand I see is Vicente, followed by Ariane.
Actually, I was just going to read that question. So,
Okay.
Sorry. Oh, okay. You got the Oakland Greens. Okay.
no, I was okay. Never mind. I was just, the question from the chat from Marianne is, what was the effect of ranked choice voting on? That's from the chat.
That's a good question. I don't recall us Green Party gaining that much. I do know that some of the Democratic, more progressive candidates gain something from it, but I've certainly not done any in-depth study. But we just didn't run enough candidates that had much of a chance to win, so I don't think we were able to make use of it.
This is Bill. Can I be on stack?
Yeah, Ariane, did you have a question, or was that addressed in the
Yes,
chat?
I still have a couple questions.
Okay, you're up. Go
Questions,
ahead.
please.
Mhm.
So forgive me if I don't know much. I'm from San Francisco and I don't follow your county politics, but basically, I remember very well when Matt Gonzalez was running and how disheartening it was for us. There are a number of things happening in San Francisco. I am an environmental activist here, and I worked in community mental health for 25 years. I remember meeting Laura Wells outside San Francisco Occupy in 2011, which was very impressive. But what I'm concerned about is a couple of things, at least in San Francisco, and I think they're emblematic of national issues. One is the amount of money that influences politics, and that there's so few really integrous, outstanding people to run. It's not just a question of party affiliation. It's a question of the quality of being, the quality of the personhood behind, what Marcus Aurelius talked about. And when he was a king, or when Plato talked about a philosopher king, that someone is totally detached from their own personal ambition. And so I'm just wondering how we can empower such people and why there's so few of them in this country. It's really shameful. But the second thing is in San Francisco, and I think it's endemic, we have so few activists. For instance, today I spent 6 hours trying to gather signatures for a ballot measure where we would ban herbicides in San Francisco city parks. It seems very obvious. Most people would not even stop to sign, they're more worried about getting a croissant or something at the farmer's market. And both young and older people, so incredibly self-absorbed. And then within the activism community, it's pretty much an elderly community, and we're literally dying off, and we're not able to get younger people really engaged in rolling up their sleeves. So these are these two issues. They're sort of undergirding the amount of money in politics, the fact that there's not outstanding people to run in any party. And then the third thing is that there's so little real participation that we can count on. I mean, younger people do their thing with social media, but I'm talking about on the ground, going into the Board of Supervisors offices, doing things where you're really trying to evoke a specific change and manifest it.
Yeah, well, hopefully during Laura Wells's session on our future, we'll be addressing some of those things. I mean, there's no question that the amount of money to run for office, especially the major offices, president, U.S. Congress, and even state legislature, it goes up way more than the inflation rate. So yeah, it's getting more and more expensive to run for office, and some local offices as well. And of course, even just to live in San Francisco takes so much money now, unless you happen to have gotten I assume there's still some rent control departments, but anyway, yeah. So hopefully we'll talk about that when we talk about what to do for our future.
Some of us are hanging out in this space because there's so much work to do, and it's an illusion that this is a progressive city in some ways, when there's such gross economic disparity, just like in New York City. I mean, we really have to talk about these issues and expose the contradictions, even among progressives.
Okay, we should probably take maybe, are there two hands up more? And
on stack is Bill and then Rick. And
Yeah,
we also have
okay, well,
Laura's
then
hand raised.
let's see if we can close the stack so Laura gets a chance to go on to the next section. So who's next?
Bill, go ahead, Bill.
Thank you. I apologize. Second time this week I've had difficulty accessing the Zoom link, so I'm on my phone. And maybe you covered this because I've been in and out. But could you say a little bit more about our effort, and there are others here, I know Mike Rubin, to challenge the legislation that Maldonado and others put in, for the top two, and both here in California and nationally, because there are other states. Have we made any progress on this in terms of overturning it? I was, along with Laura and others, and Menashe, were, I guess 2010 was the last election where we were pretty much guaranteed to appear on the November ballot. So.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think that Michael Rubin was the lead plaintiff in the major legal challenge to top two in California, and we pretty much struck out. I mean, I think did it go to the California Supreme Court?
It did. They refused to hear it.
Yeah,
I recall.
Yeah, so we struck out at all the levels, and I'm pretty sure there hasn't been a major challenge since then, at least in California. I have no idea what's going on in other states, but I assume that probably other states are challenging it if they try to implement top two. And fortunately, there doesn't seem to be too many states that are trying to implement top two. So, you know, maybe eventually there'll be a way to have it fade away. I don't know.
Next up is Rick. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I learned a lot from it. What I was hoping to hear was something more of, in addition, as a critical history. That is, what are the lessons that we might draw from this experience? And in particular, are there things that we could have done differently? And if so, why did we miss the boat? Over.
Well, that's a pretty tricky question, because when you're in the middle of the process, you know, you don't really have an idea of the other options. I guess, you know, maybe we would have, when Nader ran in 2000, have figured out a way to get around the bad publicity we got from that, and maybe have networked more with other activist groups and the like, because, you know, we were on the upswing. We were growing throughout the period from 1992 to 2000. But, you know, once we got that bad meme of the Greens are just spoilers, and, you know, we're a two-party system and you got to bite the bullet and forget third parties, it made it much more difficult. So I guess that's probably, looking back, the biggest thing. And, you know, we still are up against that wall. So we're still trying to deal with that. And you know, maybe we'll have to look at the, this is being recorded, so we'll maybe have to look at the recording and see if there's other things that might come to mind about what we could have done differently at different points.
All right. Next on stack is Laura Wells, and maybe you have a comment or response to any of the history questions you've heard, and then from there we'll just transition right into your presentation. So go ahead.
Okay. I did want to say something about ranked choice voting, which is that before ranked choice voting, San Francisco and the East Bay had elected folks. And then after that, I mean, it came in, and I think it was 2003 in San Francisco, and then it was 2006 in Berkeley, or maybe before that, and 2006, and some other places. But what the Democrats did is to lay it out that if you wanted to take the step, you had to become a Democrat. And they said, you know, they would give you union endorsements and so on if you were a Democrat, but not if you were a Green. And so San Francisco at some point had 5 or 6 elected people, and all but one of them switched to Democrats, and they were elected as Greens. And it happens even now when people who run, and whether they win or they don't win, but like Kevin Mejia is an example, then if they want to run for something else, then they switch to Democrat because the system has set it up that way. And the media, you could call it a green out, where they have occasionally made, we've heard of explicit policies never to cover the Greens, except with that word that's, you know, spoil, and otherwise not covered. And one of the, my experience of having run a bunch of times is that I could see that happen every 4 years, less every 4 years, no matter what. So that history going into the future, which, boy, don't I wish I had a prediction, or any of us, but we'll talk a little bit about what's happening nationally, state, and locally, and then I'll throw out a couple of questions. It's 5 minutes to 6, and we have until 6:30. Is that right? And so I'll want to shut up myself so that we can have some dialogue. And I have to say that I kept imagining that this Green Sunday was going to be at the Nebel Proctor Library. I couldn't get it out of my head that we were, hoping that we were going to be in person. Because for one thing, I had the idea I was going to have these like signatures in lieu petitions and pass those around. And another was that I was going to ask people questions and get answers. And so Zoom is so limited, and I cannot wait until we can be what human beings are meant to be, which is together. So nationally, we've Greg laid it out pretty well between Obama in 2008 and then 2012, and then Bernie Sanders in 2016, and the same thing again in 2020. People have registered with the Democrats. And there are, I would say, a lot of Greens across the country that are registered Democrat or they're registered independent, but they are Green. If the system had, for example, proportional representation, the way Germany has proportional representation, and as a matter of fact, 90 of the couple hundred nations in the world have some form of proportional representation. That's what you need in order to have a multi-parties system as opposed to a two-party system. So nationally, but we have to run president, and I'm sure, probably, I imagine everybody here has heard the thing, well, why don't you know what I think the Greens ought to do? And they come up with this, like they just thought of it. The Greens ought to run locally and build up. And so guess what? We have to run for a president in order to get any kind of attention. And while California has remained on the ballot all of this time, other states need that boost of a presidential candidate in order to get back on the ballot, in order to, have people inspired again. So we have to run for president, and there are probably some other technical reasons as well. So we do that for ballot access. And statewide, we have left Unity Slate, which is another thing that I've heard a lot of people during my campaigns, and they've said, why don't all the small parties run together so that you have more power? Actually do think all of the parties, including the constitutional / American Independent Party that was started by George Wallace to oppose integration. And we're not going to get together with them. And the libertarians, well, a big part of their platform, I mean, some of the things are in line with Green values, and but a big part of it is don't tax, is no tax, no tax, no tax. That's what they want to be liberated from, similar to the founding fathers who didn't want to pay tax to England. That has been a long tradition. So but peace and freedom and the Green Party are very similar. We have a lot of values in common. And so the Green Party of California set up a committee, the statewide candidate committee, subcommittee, and Greg Jan was a key member on that, and have come up with a slate of candidates for the statewide offices, 6 or 7 of them. We're still working on that last one, where we're both green and peace and freedom. And so and we'll have a website, hopefully it'll be called leftunityslate.org. And we'll be able to say, yes, we're working in coalition, we're working together, those of us that have those 2 parties that have progressive values. So that's coming up on the state. And there are signatures in lieu of filing fees that are the candidates are collecting between now and February 9th. So that's going to come very fast. One of the things that systemically, if you really wanted to have a democracy, you would say, hey, it's a pandemic. Maybe we should reduce the number of signatures that's needed because people aren't going out. And besides, the filing period, the time to collect the signatures ended 2 days after the last holiday when some people were getting together, and now it's January and it's cold and it's rainy. You know, it's probably 10 times harder to get those petitions. So rather than 10,000 or whatever it is, let's have it be 1,000, but no, that's not happening. And that's systemic, and we're constantly facing the systemic problems. Locally, the Democratic Party is, you know, it runs San Francisco, as Ariana was mentioning. It has a progressive reputation, but yet the inequality is terrible, and people do not want to be taxed in San Francisco relative to the amount of money that they have. And that's the same thing. Berkeley, what used to be called the People's Republic of Berkeley, and it's, you know, it has a full progressive city council, and they're doing repressive, regressive kinds of things. And so that's and yet the reputation still stands, just like the reputation of the Democratic Party still stands as if it's the party of the people, whereas all they have to do is be better than the Republicans, and that's pretty, and you can be really bad and be better than the Republicans. And so that's where we're at. But I am excited about the left Unity Slate and the other opportunities that we've had for working together. So one of the things that I think that we can, I'm trying to think which order I want to do this in. Okay, I'll do what I think that we need, that people say over and over again, what we really need in this local, state, and national is a huge social movement. We need people to say enough is enough. I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore, and come out and be part of a huge social movement. Everybody has different issues, but that's where, when we talked about the history, that the Greens, it's like the Green Party is where you pull them all together. And so everybody can have their different issues, but we need a huge social movement. And how do you do that? Well, we need to raise consciousness. And how do you do that? So need a huge social movement. We need to raise consciousness. And how do you do that when you're fighting, struggling against people that have enormous resources, and the resources are growing, including the placement of information inside people's heads. I'm going to say a couple of things that I wish that the Green Party would do a little differently, and that is that we would practice more what they call, I've been a Latin American solidarity activist, and I've been fortunate enough to go down to countries in Latin America where they had voted in people who were actually, however imperfect, their leaders and their government were on the side of their people, which really, as you know, pissed off the US and the chief of the countries of those that are sanctioned by the US, which is Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, really irritated the United States and have been punished for that. But having gone to Latin America, the concept of revolutionary discipline, I wish that the Green Party had more revolutionary discipline. And that comes down to where I wish we would start Green Sunday at 5 o'clock, no, not later than that, just start it at 5 o'clock. I often attend ICSS, which is the Institute for Integral Studies of Socialism, or I don't know what it stands for. It's Sunday morning. And it used to be at the Nebel Proctor Library, and it's the study of Marxism. They start exactly at 10:30 on Sunday morning, which is a bit of a challenge. And so anyway, I wish that we had revolutionary discipline, and sometimes we do, where we do what we say we're going to do, as Greg was talking about during the time of collecting 100,000 signatures, that kind of thing. I also wish we'd stop wasting time, that we would stop doing things that are pure make work. And that we and I, would realize what makes sense for us to spend our time on here. And is it diving into esoteric rules and perpetuating them, or is it gathering ourselves together, making connections, combining our strength with the strength of those people that are in issue movements and things like that. Consensus is a huge time waster in my view. I mean, it can be used, but we need to deal with the fact that it can also be used for minority rule. And at the state level, that's pretty much where it's at. We need to stop, among the time wasters that we need to stop is that we need to stop people who have been outrageously disruptive to any advances that we're trying to make. And so we're dealing with that. And it's not easy, and it's not the kind of thing that people want to do. We want to move forward, we want to create, we don't want, but we need to, we need to, what's her name? Fled out of my mind. Some famous person whose name I'll think of later said that we need to stop the bad, start the good, and change the process. Stop the bad, start the good, and change the process. So we've talked about consensus process. Use it where it's useful, and then watch out for minority rule. Get rid of the bad, the people that are doing nothing but disrupting. The Green Party is a very open system. We're, open, come on in, we include everybody, respect for diversity, which is, we absolutely need more respect for diversity. But we need to have more revolutionary discipline and recognize when things are disrupting that. So that's what I think we need to do. And it's 6:08 now, so I'm going to see if I can wrap this up in a couple of minutes, and then we can have 15 minutes for Q&A and comments. But I was thinking today about what do we have? What do we own? It's about ownership, the fact that the super rich own everything and they have the resources. Well, basically, I've made a list of what do they own. And this is one of the examples of where I was hoping that we were all together in a room and people could pop up with things that I may have, that I may forget. But I'm going to talk about what do they own, and I'm going to talk about what do we own, and then hopefully open this up. What do they own? A lot of the land. They, who is they? They are the people with all the money and the resources, the oligarchy, the plutocracy, which is ruled by the rich, right? And the government is not the whole government is not terrible. There are people in the government that are on our side, but the government as a whole is owned by the super rich, as we all know. So when I'm talking about they, I'm mostly talking about the super rich and the people that are aligned with them, and the government that they control. So they own the land, they own the military, They own the right to punish, including incarcerate and including kill and fine, get money. So they own that right. They have the right to interfere beyond our borders in the same way that they have the right to punish within our borders. They own the information that goes inside most people's heads. And that's not even just media, it's textbooks, that are in the schools. And they own, as I mentioned, the politicians. But what do we own? And I'm talking now about the Green Party. So our little piece of gold, our treasure really is a ballot line. What we have is a ballot line. Candidates can run as Greens. We do the paperwork. We keep the 2%, or we, either as in an election or in registration. We do these various things that you absolutely have to do to keep a ballot line. And we've kept that for 30 years in California. We have lists of people who have registered Green. So we can get that. That's something that we own. We have connections, not just in California. The Greens are across the country and around the world. So we have those connections, and that's a power. That's something that we have. We do have a brand. I mean, how many times do you see things where people say, well, we're going green, or this is green, or we want the green way, we want the green. And what we really need is, another party, and we need a new party. Okay, we've got the Green Party, but green is a great brand, especially when people understand that it also means social justice. And we have our values, whether it's 4 pillars or 10 key values, we have our values, and it's backed up by no corporate money. We don't take corporate money, which means that we're true with our values. And we have the ability to have ideas. Sometimes when people say, well, what has the Green Party done? The Green Party, I've mentioned this before, I think could be considered the most powerful, successful, progressive think tank in the country, because we have ideas and we run candidates, both presidential level, state level, and local level. And we do voter guides, and we do things like that, where we put those ideas out there. And what ideas have they, some of them have gotten elected, have gotten implemented, such as same-sex marriage, such as legalization of cannabis, such as, if you go back in history, even more with other third parties. But and the Green New Deal, who came up with that? Green Party. So we do have those things. We have a ballot line, we have a list of registered Greens, we have connections across the state, country, and world. We have a brand, we have our values, we have the ability to have ideas. So that's what we have. What can we do with that? That is the question. And it's 6:14 now, and so we can open that up to Q&A and comments. And I see my chat has 39 new messages. But anyway, so thank you for your attention and for being green.
All right, please post your questions in the chat or use the raise hand feature. And if we have 15 minutes left, so if you can keep your comment or question to under a minute, we can have a chance to hear everyone, and maybe even time for a follow-up. So first I see Ariane, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I want to talk about the role of community radio. I talk on KPFA from time to time. KPFA has totally been overcome by nativists, and nativists are actually a front for the pesticide, herbicide industry and for developers. And yet the station is very wedded to those and other conservative ideas. I wish we could have more of an influence, maybe even have someone run their own radio show. It's a bunch of volunteers, but KPFA is an important resource, and in many cases, it's going in the wrong direction. So if there's time, I'll ask another question later. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I see Michael Shin. Go ahead, and then Rick.
Hi. So Laura just listed a lot of things that the Green Party has, but I wanted to point out something that the Green Party lacks severely, and I think that is just people and active members. So that's a severe dearth where if we address that, I think will help with a lot of the issues with the Green Party, especially it being spread so thin. So one thing I would like to see is a lot of focus on recruiting active Green Party members into the party, just going out, talking to strangers or people that we know, and just trying to radicalize them and trying to bring them into the party and just selling the idea of party itself. So in the chat, I wrote a vision of what I plan to do personally, but I thought I would share it just in case anybody wants to see. That's it.
Thank you, Michael. And Laura, feel free to jump in at any time, but otherwise I'll keep going down and we can take a few at a time. Rick, go ahead.
I think Michael makes some good points. I want to touch on something else though, and it connects a little bit of what Greg was saying to what Laura was saying. Greg pointed out how in the origins of the Green Party in the 80s and the 90s, there was an attempt to move away from single issue activism and become an electoral party. But I think it poses the question of whether we didn't bend the stick a little too far in one direction. That is, one of the things that we can do is become a way for singular issue activist groups to be able to work together across the issues of single activism, transcend the issues of single activism. But that means we ourselves have to be involved as Greens in these activist movements. And I feel like that's something that needs to be discussed and considered further. Over.
Okay, I see Bob Schofield. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to follow up on what the last speaker did about becoming involved with activist movements. I'm going to make a suggestion, even though I feel hypocritical doing it. I suggest that those of you that do Instagram, check out the Instagram page of NorCal Resist. I feel like a hypocrite because I don't do Instagram. This is an organization that has a big urban farm in West Sacramento. It's trying to get another urban farm in Sacramento. They have giant food distributions. They have free taillight repair clinics so that immigrants can't be stopped by the police because of taillights being out. They have an event in Chico on the 22nd of this month. They're delivering food to individuals. Twice in the last few days, they've been asked to deliver food to COVID positive families. They're doing it. In 2021, they issued 100 immigration bonds to get people out of custody. They provide apartments, furniture, and food to immigrants. Now, the reason I got into this is because I shouldn't say this, but I've spent hours watching left-wing YouTube. And what I've learned is that AOC and the squad are forcing people out of the Democratic Party into the mutual aid movement. And to follow up on the last speaker's comment about getting involved in activist groups, I think it would be a good idea for the Green Party to kind of come together with the mutual aid movement. So I recommend checking out the NorCal Resist Instagram page just to get a flavor of the incredible actions that they're engaged in. That's all I have to say.
Okay, I don't see anyone else on stack right now. Oh, Vicente's hand just popped up. Go ahead, Vicente.
Because the hand is dark. And so I went to the last speaker. Sadly, we can't because we have so much internal drama that needs to be dealt with, as was mentioned by Laura. And then my other comment on that, I think we also need to name names. David Cobb and I also agree too that we need to be able to have the conflict, but with nonviolent communication. And sometimes, right, and every people who know me are like, what, nonviolent communication? But aren't you the motherfucker, right? You're the fuck you party. I think that sometimes when it's been going on for so long and no one is willing, and I always say, well, call me from fucking North Philly, call me from being a POAD person. We just don't talk like that, not without the reactions that come. So I think the name should be called out. I just don't think it should be on, I think that's family business. So it needs to be like not recorded and we need to have it out amongst ourselves. And for those that show up, we do that on the open greens, and our meetings are public, when they were in person and also virtual. But there are times where we turn the recording off because we need to handle family business. You can come and witness it if you want, right? It's not like we're trying to hide anything, but some things I think need to be kept internal, and I will end there. Thank you.
Shane, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yes, can everyone see me
Yes.
and hear me? Good. Well, I made a comment in the chat that green was also used to denote money. And unfortunately, the duopoly controls everything relative to the system in terms of money and funds. I have not heard anyone mention this, but I am sure that eventually we're going to have to essentially ante up with funding for some of our candidates. Is there a plan to be able to do that? There's one thing that that everyone has said, and that is, let's get more like-minded people. But like-minded people aren't necessarily the same as being able to ante up any funding. So how can we kind of compete on duopoly terms?
Thanks, Shane. I don't see any new hands, so we'll go back around to Vicente.
Cool. This is going to be a direct response. We put forth a proposal of trying to target influencers and even more celebrities that actually have income. One of the things we do inside of that is when we say fundraising, we call it navigating a corrupt capitalist system. Unfortunately, again, I feel like we still have too much internal shit to deal with because people are spread so thin and we're doing so much already just to, as I put it, maintain enough to take a breath of water until you sink, until you can't sink no more before you're going to die. And then you struggle to get back up to the top to get another breath and just start sinking again. Some of that, again, I think is tied to not dealing with our own internal issues. So there is ideas out there, not just the one I just mentioned, but there are ideas out there to try to navigate the corrupt funding with the duopoly. Over.
All right, Laura, you're up.
Okay, I just want to say about the great ideas about doing doing mutual aid and working in the other issues, is that it's hard to scratch an organization, even an issue-specific organization that's doing good work and not find Greens. So they are there. Often people say, what are the Greens doing? The Greens are there. And I think that what AOC, being in the position of being in Congress, I wish that she were doing more for systemic change than they have been able to do. And they seem not to have any kind of either this is, I guess one good example was with Pelosi when she was getting reelected as a Speaker of the House. They had power there actually. They could have said, we're not going to back you unless Pelosi stopped being a right-wing progressive reputation person. And so I think that, you see, it's a tricky thing because we need to both deal with the systemic, the interconnections of all of these issues, and do the administrative bureaucratic things to keep that in place. And at the same time that all of our, that we have passions in these different issue areas. One of the little practical things that we can do in terms of recruiting is to be seen being green, as they say. When we show up, wear a t-shirt that has the Green Party on it. There's some cool ones and things like that. But I just want to say it's a tough thing. And we do need to do more recruitment. In terms of money, we need to ask more. That is one thing for sure. In terms of, you would just ask. We don't actually ask enough. And I want to pick up also on what Michael Shin was saying. We don't ask people to become green enough, and so I'm eager to read what it was that you posted in the chat. Over.
I see Bob, but just before you, Bob, I wanted to, in case everyone's not following the chat, Aiden had some comments a short time ago about recruiting more young people. I'll just read part of it. There is absolutely zero political representation for Gen Alpha right now and the Green Party, which claim to care about the rights of the child. And so they've not attempted to establish a committee or a platform for the next generation of leadership. In other words, young people going down to 15 years old, they're almost voting age. Let's engage them right now, and they'll move right in. So I wanted to make sure that got in the discussion. So next, Bob, followed by Michael Rubin.
Yeah, I'll be real brief. After listening to Laura, I just want to, I was talking fast. I just want to clarify my reference to AOC. In an ironic sense, I think AOC is doing a great job simply because she is turning off so many young people. AOC and the squad are responsible for many young people getting out of the Democratic Party and into the mutual aid movement. So I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Michael, go ahead, unmute yourself.
I just wanted to sort of respond to something that Laura said. I think that the Bernie-crats in the Congress have almost no power. I mean, when they do challenge Pelosi and the other leaders of the Democratic Party, they come in a distant second. And I think it's a mistake to believe that they have any power. The sad thing is that someone like AOC, that she issues these, cogent criticisms of her own party, but stays. I mean, that's the problem. If she actually believed what she said, she'd leave, but she doesn't believe it. In other words, I think this is dog whistles, for people to not leave the Democratic Party. I think the people like Sanders and others like him, they provide a reason to stay a Democrat, even though you don't accomplish anything that you actually believe in. Over.
Thanks. Michael Shin, I saw your hand. Are you still on stat?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, kind of in response to Rick's comment. I think I just want to share my experience with the local DSA. So locally in Orange County, the Green Party is inactive. On the other hand, the DSA, their general meetings, their monthly meetings, they get like 30 people a month, and they are very vibrant, and they have like a mutual aid program, and they have all these educational work groups. So I think it's valuable for Green Party members to check out their own DSA and to build a bridge between the Green Party and the DSA so that they can feel welcome, or they feel invited to come join the Greens when they feel when they feel it's right.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. We're at 6:30, so Karin, you're on stack, and then we should see if either or both of our presenters have any last wrap-up comments, and then that will take us out. Karin, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. This is a little out of the box and definitely not thought through, but something Laura said made me think about emerging from the pandemic and the fact that there's so little joy in so many people's lives and has been for so long. And to talk about, Laura talking about people needing to get together. I've long thought that we should have a party, just because people need to meet each other. And what if it could somehow be combined with mutual aid? So the idea is, I'm just throwing it out there, coming out parties, coming out of the pandemic, that we have a plan that when we feel like it's safe, we could, at our local levels, hold a party, be sponsored by the Green Party. We can invite our activist allies. We could invite mutual aid people to give away food and whatever else, and just do something fun and beautiful as a way to start meeting people. It's over.
Thanks, Karin. Greg or Laura, do you have any final words before we wrap up?
Greg, go first, please.
Well, the only thing I guess I was thinking of is many of us are pretty familiar with some of the details, the intricacies of how bad things are. I mean, it's not hard at all to look at many issues and to be get very depressed about things. But I think that in terms of trying to build a party, I think it might help us if we tried to look at the potential positive solutions that are out there that are simply being held back by the status quo. And so, maybe we could try to create some literature pieces, some videos, and some other information on all kinds of these great answers that to inspire people that we don't have to we don't have to be stuck in the quagmire. There is a way out if we can join together and make it happen, because it's really just maybe 5% versus 95%. I think that it's a little bigger than 1%, but I think that there's still probably about 95% of the people that really want to get out of this mess. So I guess that's my comment.
And I'll just say that what I was actually going to say something very similar to what Greg just said, and that was that the how do we get anywhere? Do we do it mostly by critiquing everything that critiquing mostly what people who are trying to do something, or is there a different way of going about that? And I'll bring up a little story that of a video that I saw of a couple of young people from Latin America, and one of them was saying that it was a very curious thing to him that when he visited the United States, it seemed to him, and he was talking about socialists, it seemed to him that they thought that their major job was to critique all the socialist efforts around the world. And he just found that curious. And so their critique, yes, we need critique, but we also need to support, and we need solidarity. And there are some things that we don't agree with exactly. I'm thinking of Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua, or other people in Latin America, and even other, like peace and freedom even, there can be, and even within the Green Party. Can we find some things that we agree on and move forward on those, as well as doing our critiques?